The world has a common concept of greatness and heroism. The world often thinks that greatness is found in things like wealth. That's why we hear stories of people who are the wealthiest people in the United States, who are the wealthiest people in the state. That's why names like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg make headlines in Forbes, the Forbes magazine. We hear stories of people who are the biggest donors at schools, who donate a large amount of money so a hospital can build a new wing. Sometimes you hear about the wealthiest family at a church, as if that's extremely important to some people. We sometimes think that greatness is found in popularity. My kids will show me every once in a while, here's somebody who has a zillion followers on. They're not on Facebook. They say Facebook is for old people. But on TikTok or on Instagram or something like that. Look at how many followers they have. Look at how popular they are. Dad, did you know that if you have this many followers that people will start sponsoring you and you can start making money off of that? So we're living in a world where some people, that's their goal. They want to become popular. They want to have a lot of followers. They want to be able to live off of, I guess, Instagram advertisements. Our world idolizes natural talent and ability. People who are very smart, the valedictorians at schools. And hey, if you've achieved that, good for you. But sometimes we idolize those things. Sometimes we do it when our kids are very young, right? Look, my little one is already walking. My little one can already say their ABCs. They started reading at this age. They're a future child prodigy. I hope that's the case for you. But we look at those things as extremely important. Look at how good my little 4-year-old, they scored like so many points in the basketball game. My little 8-year-old's just the best running back on his team. They're just so great. And we build up our kids based upon their smarts sometimes, their athleticism, their natural talents. There's other things that we look at as well, but I'm afraid that sometimes when these are the things that are important to us, when these are the things that we think make someone great, that we're looking at the wrong things. We're using the world's standard of greatness to define what greatness is. And you know what? The truth is, not everybody, if those are the true standards of greatness, not everybody's going to be great. And I don't think that's the case when it comes to God's standard of greatness. You don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the most beautiful. You don't have to have the most money. You don't have to be the most popular to be great in God's kingdom. God has a different standard of greatness. And I want to think with you today about the true definition of greatness. It's found here in Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 through 28. Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 through 28. And Jesus is the one who provides the definition for us in this passage. Matthew 20, starting in verse 20. This was already read to us, but the scene that we have here is that James and John come with their mother, and they are wanting the two best positions in the kingdom. Take a look at it. In verse 20, it says, "The mother of the sons of Zebedee came to Jesus with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. And he said to her, 'What do you wish?' She said to him, 'Command.'" Well, she's got a lot of audacity to command Jesus, doesn't she? "Command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit one on your right and one on your left." And Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink?" And like we learned in Bible study this morning, sometimes when Jesus uses the term cup, he's not speaking literally, just like when he uses the term bread or water or things of that nature. But they said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "My cup you shall drink." And I believe he's talking about his cup of suffering. He's going to suffer. His apostles would also suffer for his sake. But he says, "To sit on my right and on my left, this is not mine to give. It is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. Now he goes on to say, as we read through the text, hearing this, the 10 became indignant with the two brothers. So this causes a bit of a stir among the apostles. Who do you think you are is kind of their viewpoint. You think you're so special? You think you're better than us? They're indignant. And Jesus realizes he's got a dispute on his hands. He's got a fight. An argument is brewing. And he calls them to himself and he says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. Notice what Jesus is doing here. Jesus is contrasting. This is the way you see things done in the world. This may be how you see things done among the Gentiles. This is how other men determine greatness. It's all about position. It's about authority. It might be about wealth, and it might be about rank, and it might be about talent. But he says, it is not this way among you. The way the world views greatness, that's not going to be the way that greatness is viewed in my kingdom. He says, whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. Whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Notice that James and John, along with their mother, they thought positions of greatness were up for grabs. They thought perhaps by vote, perhaps by appointment, perhaps due to some sort of natural talent or capability or favoritism on behalf of Jesus, that they could be put into a position of greatness. But Jesus tells us what true greatness is. I wonder sometimes, does this type of mentality infect the church? Sometimes can we be guilty of people who want recognition, who want to be considered popular, who want to be put in positions? Do we campaign for position here on earth? I can tell you stories that I know that this happens. I don't think I know you well enough to say whether or not this sort of thing happens here, but I know my experiences in churches long enough to be able to tell you I think that this happens. We think because we have seniority in a church, we've been there so long that somehow that gives us greater position. We're greater. We think because we're wealthier and we give more to the church perhaps than others. I don't know how you know that, but we think that somehow that makes our say greater. I've known people who got upset because they thought they were Sunday morning psalm leaders and they were put on for Sunday night. And they were mad about it because their natural talents demanded that they be on the roster for Sunday morning. It's kind of silly. But sometimes we think kind of silly like James and John did. I don't think that means that, we can't correct that thinking. Jesus needed to correct that thinking, just like we'll have to do that sometimes. But what is true greatness in the kingdom? What is it that makes a follower of Jesus truly great? I'm going to show you a few things that it's not. That it's not. Before we take a look at what it specifically is. First of all, true greatness is not all about money. If you are blessed with money and financial prosperity, that's a great opportunity for you to serve. But greatness is not determined by money. Here is a woman named Tabitha, and we certainly don't see anything about her money here, but we know what she did for others. In Acts 9 and verse 36, at Joppa there was a certain disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. She was full of good works and charitable deeds, which she did. And Peter arose and went, and all the widows stood by him weeping. This Tabitha may have been a widow who died as well, but it doesn't actually say that. She may have just befriended the widows here. But she made among her friends people who were poor, people who were probably in poverty, and she made the decision to help them. and showed, and these widows, knowing how she had helped them, showed Peter the tunics and the garments which Dorcas had made while she was with them. There's no indication of how wealthy she was here, anything like that. None of that is mentioned. You know what is mentioned is she was a woman full of good works and charitable deeds, which she did. Have you ever known somebody in the church who's like a Tabitha? I can tell you in every church I've been in, there have been many times multiple women who were much like this Tabitha. Ever known somebody who was always knitting a little, hat and mittens for newborns? Somebody in the church who quilted a blanket for your little ones when they were born? Somebody who was quick to pay attention to the widows and the poor to make sure that they had clothes and they had things that they needed for the winter? I've known people like that in every church I've ever been in. In fact, we're packing up to move, and we're moving here in 2 weeks, putting everything in storage, at least for the summer. So we'll be over here in Indiana. But when we're packing up, we have you seen those huge Ziploc bags, those huge big bags that you can just put blankets in and fill them up? We have 2 huge Ziploc bags like that of blankets we don't really use, but we can't throw them away. We just can't. Because they're things that people have made for us. When we got married, we had a lady make us a quilt, and everybody signed their name on the quilt. We don't use the quilt because you don't want to mess the quilt up because everybody signed their name on it, so it just sits in storage, right? We've got little blankets where I've got Sam and Zoe and Hattie when they were all born. I mean, multiple people made blankets for us. When we moved, I had somebody give us 6 blankets as if we didn't have enough. That was very nice. But we have a lot of blankets, all right? But we just can't get rid of them because I realize the heart that is behind the people who give those to you. I think about those ladies who sat there for hours and hours thinking about you while they quilted that pattern together and while they knitted those things together that they were making for you because they loved you. And I don't know if they had any money. I don't know anything about their wealth. But in my mind, those people are great because they give of themselves, of their hearts. They gave. And Tabitha was like that. And I've known Tabithas in every church I've ever been in who are just humble, quiet women who don't receive a lot of public recognition, but they just serve. It's not about money. You know, the widow at the treasury didn't have a lot of money, but Jesus pointed out this poor widow above the people who were giving a lot of money because of the sacrifice that she was making in her giving. It wasn't about the monetary amount. It was about the sacrifice that she was willing to make. In this day and age, by the way, people probably weren't putting in checks or even the cash that we have in our society today. They were probably putting in coin. And it was very obvious the people who put in more coin into the treasury versus this widow who just put in basically what was the amount of 1/3 of a cent. But Jesus points her out and points out that she gave in much because she put out of her poverty all that she had. Jesus sees the sacrifice involved, the service involved with this woman, and he points her out above other people who were giving more money. He sees her as great. On the converse, we read about a rich fool in Luke chapter 12. And we see what Jesus thinks of this rich fool as he tells this parable in verses 16 through 21. He says, the land of a rich man was very productive. Here's the type of man that our world would idolize. Our world would note. His name would make the papers because he was rich and he was productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? If you're a farmer, that's a good problem to have. You have a bountiful crop. And so he said, this is what I will do. I'll tear down my barns. I'll build larger ones. I will store all my grain and my goods. I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Let me ask you a question. Who is this person serving in life? I heard somebody whisper, himself. Yeah, himself, because it's all about I, my, me, my stuff. God tells him, because that's his mentality, it's all about his money and his things and his house and his barns, you fool. This is what God thinks of the person whose focus is on himself and not others. You fool. This very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself. There's that word. And is not rich toward God. Here's someone not giving to God and certainly not mindful of others. And Jesus does not consider him great in his kingdom. You know, it's not money. Let me notice with you also that it's also not gender. I've heard people think to themselves sometimes, because they are a woman, they can't be great in the kingdom because men have certain roles in the worship of the church and women have certain roles. Those are delineated to us in 1 Corinthians chapter 14. But I want to suggest to you that you can be a woman, you can be great in the kingdom. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, notice what the standard of greatness is according to Paul. He says, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments. What makes a woman great? According to what he's saying here, what makes a woman great is not the hairstyles, it's not the jewelry, it's not the outfits, it's not the purses, it's not the makeup, it's not the shoes, it's not the style. That's what we look at, though, when we see people on the red carpet, right, before they're entering into the Oscars and the Academy Awards and the music awards. We look at how they're dressed. We look at the jewelry they're wearing. We look at the hairdo. We evaluate how much money was spent on those things, and the world thinks that that's the goal. I hope that I can get to there someday. There's a lot of young ladies growing up, and they're thinking that's their vision. That's who they want to be. There's a couple girls that go to school where my daughter goes, and she calls them the Barbie dolls. Their focus is very outward. Their focus is on their nice car that they're driving, and they're very focused on their tan and things like that. This passage tells us that our focus as women should not be on those things. That's not what makes women great in the kingdom, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for women making a claim to godliness. How are you known? How are you known by other people? Are you known for your outward self, or are you known for your inner self? I want to contrast with you. I know that today's Mother's Day, and I want to notice two different mothers with you. I want you to think about them. You probably know about them. I want you to notice, first of all, there was a mother by the name of mother and a grandmother by the name of Lois and Eunice that you read about in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5. But I want you to notice what they were known for. In 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5, it says, when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you. Paul's writing to Timothy, and he's telling Timothy, you are a man of genuine faith, and I respect that about you. But he says, it dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded it is in you too. One of the things that Paul says as he writes to Timothy is that, Timothy, one of the reasons you are what you are is because of who your mother and your grandmother were. By the way, Timothy's father was a Greek, so mom was probably doing it by herself, raising him in a spiritual way. In 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15, he would also say in this passage, actually 2 Timothy 3:15, he says, from childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. Do you think Paul, and sometimes Paul gets called a sexist or someone who didn't really care for women, but do you think Paul had a deeply founded respect and admiration for the mother and grandmother of Timothy? I think he did. That's why he calls them out. That's why he says they're worthy of praise. Now, do you notice what he doesn't praise about them? Nothing about their physical attributes. I have no idea what they look like. I have no idea how much money they had. We've got no idea about any of those things. We know, though, that in their heart, faith dwelt and they passed it on to their grandson and their son. Now there's another mother that I want you to think about, and her name is Herodias. You read about her in Matthew chapter 14. In Matthew chapter 14, Herodias is the one who supposedly seems to have gotten tired of her husband and decided to marry actually a relative. And in marrying a relative, verse 4 of Matthew chapter 14, John says to Herod at this time, "It is not lawful for you to have her." You shouldn't be married to her, is what John says. And that doesn't set very well with Herodias, because John was calling Herodias an adulteress, as well as Herod. Verse 5 says, although he wanted to put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Just like her mom was a seductress, the daughter was a seductress too. And so he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. Well, she didn't know what to ask for. After all, this was a young girl who grew up in Herod's palace. She probably already had money. She already had clothes. She already had things. She had everything that she could ask for. She was one of the wealthiest, richest women of the land because of the family that she was connected to. And so she asked, Mom, what should I ask for? And Mom says, give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter. Now, that's not a good mom. That's a vicious, evil, vindictive mom. And you know, the only thing we really know about her was that she was seductive, that she was probably rich, she was probably wealthy. But is this the type of person that Jesus or that God admires? Absolutely not. Why? Because she's got an evil heart. Because she's not interested in doing what's right and serving others. She's interested in being served and having her own way. This is all that's wrong with the world. People that always want their own way. Jesus says the people that are right in this world are people who serve. People who serve and serve others. In this world, there's two kinds of moms. There's evil moms who are all about themselves and are all about the outer things. And then there's moms who have a good heart and who have a heart of faith and of service. And if you have had a good mom, she's certainly worthy of praise. And she is praised. Those types of moms are praised in Scripture. But not everybody's had that experience. And for those people, my heart does go out to you. Because not everybody has been in that situation. Jesus wants to change that situation. Jesus wants everybody to have family who serve, but it takes coming to him for that to happen. And you can be great in the kingdom of Jesus, despite the fact that you are, whether you are a male or a woman. So it's not about gender. It's not about gender that makes one great in the kingdom. In Philippians 4, verses 2 and 3, Paul wrote to Euodia, he said, I implore Euodia and Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord, and I urge you also, true companion, help these women who labored with me in the gospel. Paul gives credit to women in Philippians 4, verses 2 and 3. Did you ever wonder, how did Jesus go about basically wandering from city to city for 3 years, preaching the gospel of the kingdom? How many of you could take off 3 years and do nothing in your working days? That's not easy to do. It's not easy to take 3 years off. How did Jesus do that? Well, in Luke chapter 8, we read about how he did it. He went through every city and village, preaching and bringing the glad tidings of the kingdom of God. 12 were with him. How did the 12 disciples do that? How were they able to leave their nets behind, men who were fishermen and who were workers and had working jobs, and to just go out and travel with Jesus and be true disciples of him? Well, what we read here is that there were certain women who also traveled with them, and Mary called Magdalene, out of whom had come 7 demons, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, who was Herod's steward. Remember, Herod's family was very wealthy, and Joanna was the wife of someone who was a steward in Herod's household, and Susanna and many others provided for him from their substance. They gave, they served. We owe a debt of gratitude to these women because they enabled Jesus for 3 years to do what he did in his ministry. These women are considered great. Luke gives them mention because they made great sacrifices for the kingdom. I appreciate, certainly there are many women who certainly have never led a song or preached a sermon or been up here, but their actions have preached many sermons in my life. Acts of generosity and kindness and service. There's a woman back where we are, her name is Barbara, and she has cooked us so many meals that it would take my hands and my toes, and she can cook. She's great in my book. She's great. She's great because she'll spend all day. Because in her view, she wants to do whatever she can to help the preacher do his job. And so those are the things that she does. In my view, she's great because she's just willing to serve. She's willing to serve. It's not about gender. It's not about gender that makes one great in the kingdom. But there's another passage. It's in Matthew 26 here. Another woman that Jesus takes the time to mention. I want to point these things out because we do live in a world that somehow views the Bible as a sexist book, and Jesus has even been portrayed as sexist. But I want you to really read Matthew 26 and think about what's being said here. Jesus is in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper. A woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. But when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor." And when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, to who? To the men. To the men. To his disciples. "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. You have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. In pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will be told as a memorial to her." Now, what do you know about this woman? Do you know anything about her color? Do you know anything about her hairstyle? Do you know anything about what kind of shoes she was wearing or purse she carried? Do you know anything? Do you even know her name? We don't know her name according to this passage. Do you know her education? Was she a valedictorian? Did she have a 4.0? Do you know about her career? Do you know how much money she had in her bank account? Do you know how popular she was? She wasn't very popular in this house. All we know is about this generous kindness that she offers for Jesus here, and it was enough for Jesus to think that the whole world deserved to know about her. Women can be great in God's kingdom, and they can be great regardless of race or beauty or pedigree or education or fashion or finances or fame. They can be great. Jesus commends a woman here, and it's also, greatness is not about public attention. It's not how popular you are. It's not how many people notice what you did. Sometimes we only give when other people notice that we give because we do it for the recognition. But in Matthew 6, Jesus rebukes that idea too. In verses 1 through 7, it says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them." While sometimes there are some in the world who give and are noticed and are recognized, Jesus rebukes giving that is to be noticed and recognized, if that's the intent, the motive. He says, when you give to the poor, don't sound the trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. I say to you, they have their reward in full. If that's what you're going for, is you want people to notice what you did, then Jesus says, there you go, you have it. That's the only recognition and reward you're going to get. He says, when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. God sees what you've done. It's actually not very kind to turn people who are in need into your social media likes page. Do you know what I mean? You ever see people that whenever they do good things for other people, they always have to let the world know about it? I saw a comic. It was some comics aren't all funny, you know. But it was a comic. It was of a guy who was taking a picture of himself after he'd given a bag of groceries to some people who were in tattered clothes, who were poor, who were in need. And he was taking a picture of himself. There they are in the background, and he was taking a picture so that he could post it to his social media. This passage says, don't do it so that you can get recognition. Don't do it for fame. Public attention is not to be our motive. I'm afraid sometimes we can have that mentality. I think God is much more pleased. We can have that mentality when it comes to our service in the church. I told you about people that I've known that have gotten upset because they weren't, on the roster for Sunday morning song leading, or they feel like they got passed over or looked over for something. I want to tell you, God is a lot more pleased with the man who reads his Bible daily when no one is watching than the person who just had the reading in front of everybody. God's much more pleased with the man who makes prayer a personal and a family habit than the one who only prays when he can eloquently do it in front of other people. I think God's much more concerned and pleased with the man who has a spiritual song in his heart all day long than the one who just does it so he can perform in front of other people. God is much more pleased with the man who practices what he preaches than just somebody who preaches. So let's make sure that we're people of service, people who are living the life, not people who are just doing it for the praise. So what is true greatness? It's not about how much attention we get. It's not about how much money we have in our accounts. It's not about what gender we are. It's not about how young we are, how old we are. What is true greatness? Well, I think we begin to see it in this particular story that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 10. And in verses 25 through 37, you read about a certain lawyer who stood up and who tested Jesus, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said to him, "What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?" He answered and said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Right? Those are the two great commandments. Love God, love your neighbor. And he said to him, "You have answered rightly. Do this and you will live." But he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Now notice he's doing this in front of a lot of people, so he's getting a little bit of attention for it. I think Jesus is offering a contrast to how he wants to be noticed and recognized for all the commandments that he has kept and all the good things that he has done. And so Jesus gives him a contrast here in this passage. It says in verse 25 through 37, he went to him. I skipped a section there. Jesus answered and said, "A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side." You think a priest would know better, right? Somebody's in need, somebody's hurting on the side of the road, you have the opportunity to help, and you just keep going? And then a Levite. You would think a Levite, somebody from the tribe of Levi, that's where the priesthood came from. A Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked. So he does kind of a double take. At least he gave him a double take. The priest kind of just keeps on walking. The Levite stops, kind of takes a look. "Well, I see that you're having some trouble there." Okay. And just keeps going. Priest and a Levite, two people who should have known better, don't do anything about it. I wonder, why didn't they do anything about it? And then, when you read this passage and you think about it, nobody was there. Wasn't going to get any recognition for it. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe nobody was going to recognize us if we did it. Nobody was going to know if we did. Nobody's going to know if we didn't. So, what's in it for me? I'm going to have to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to have to sacrifice. I'm going to have to help this guy out. And they keep going. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, here he is by himself journeying, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Didn't matter if other people were watching or looking or knew what he did. He saw a man, a human being in need. And so he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, so he spends a whole day with this man. When he departed, he took out 2 denarii. That's 2 days' wages. What are 2 days' wages for you? What are 2 days' wages for you? So calculate that in your mind. What do you make on average in 2 days of work? That's how much money he gives to the innkeeper, because a denarius is a day's wage. He took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him. Whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. Jesus asks a very obvious question. Which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? Now this Jew it was hard for him to say the word Samaritan. So he just says, he who showed mercy on him. And so Jesus, I think, knowing it was hard for him to say Samaritan, and indeed the Samaritan does set the good example here, he says, well, how about you go and be like the Samaritan then? Go and do likewise. What is it that makes the Good Samaritan great? Well, he's compassionate. He sees those who are in want, and he sees those who are in need. And when he sees that there is a need, he sees what he can do to help. He's courageous. Do you realize that this man who was beaten and left for dead, that the same people who beat him may very well have still been around? You think that thought might have occurred in the back of the priest, the Levite, the Samaritan's mind, that what happened to him could happen to me if I help? Because after all, I'm here on this rocky road between Jerusalem and Jericho, and there are robbers and thieves. That's why it's kind of foolish to travel alone on a road like that. But it doesn't matter that he could have been injured too. He was courageous, and he still stopped to help. His help is also personal, and it is voluntary. Nobody made him do it. I have a phrase where sometimes when you're asking for volunteers, right? If you don't volunteer, you're going to get voluntold, right? Because somebody's got to do it. He doesn't have to be voluntold. He voluntarily chooses to see to the need. His love is conquering. He doesn't see a Samaritan, he sees a human being. And so he crosses lines of prejudice. He doesn't see a false religion. He doesn't see a false tradition. He doesn't see a color. He sees a human being who is in need, and he helps attend to the need. And his love is selfless. He offers of himself, his oil, his wine, his donkey, his animal. He offers money, and he does not expect reimbursement. He does not expect recognition. This is the type of person who exhibits true greatness. Now, I want to make something clear. I don't want anybody to feel bad here for a minute, but is there anything wrong with having some of the things the world deems as great? It's okay to be smart. But here's the point of this lesson. Use your smarts to serve the Lord and to defend his word. Use it to serve him. It's okay to be rich, but use your riches, not just for yourself, but to help others and to advance kingdom laborers, to help out needy brethren as opportunity arises. Use what you have to serve. It's okay to be popular. Some people are just more popular than others, easier to get along. But use your platform to speak Christ rather than hiding your light under a bushel. It's okay to be beautiful and attractive, but use it to show people that there's greater beauty that can exist within us through Jesus Christ. It's okay to have a nice house, but use it to be hospitable to others and to serve others. It's okay to have a nice car, but are you ready to help transport other people who need a ride to worship, who need a ride to the doctor, who need to be served? It's okay to eat great food, but share that meal with your brothers and sisters and with preachers and elders. The Samaritan did that. That's what we see from him. He had oil and wine. There was nothing wrong with that. He had a nice donkey. There was nothing wrong with that. He had money in his pocket, but he didn't hoard it for himself. He used it for the good of others when the opportunity and necessity arose to do so. He's not great because of his things. He's great because of what he did with those things. And those are the blessings of serving. I want to tell you there's great blessings in serving. Great blessings. For one, you get to be like Jesus. This is the ultimate example that Jesus set for us. And it's amazing to me when I read John chapter 13 because I realize that the people that Jesus was serving in this passage were the very people who would deny him, betray him, and scatter and leave him all by himself. That didn't enter into Jesus' thinking when he thought about serving these people in John 13. It says, when the feast of the Passover had come, and when his hour had come, that he should depart from this world, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Supper being ended, notice, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. The process was already moving. The ball was already rolling. Judas was already planning to betray Jesus. And yet, after supper, Jesus rises up, lays aside his garments, and takes a towel, and he girds himself. And he goes on to say that after that, he poured water in the basin. He began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. And when he'd washed their feet, he took his garments, he sat down again, and he said, "Do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord. Do you want to be Christ-like? Is Jesus your Lord?" Jesus says, "If you call me Lord, if I am your Lord and teacher and have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Moreover," he says, "a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him." Do you want to be great? Jesus says, here's the standard for it. When you see someone who is in need, maybe as simple as this was the lowest job of a slave in a household, to wash somebody's dirty, nasty feet. And Jesus says, if I've set the example that I'll do the dirtiest job in a household for you, then if I'm your Lord, you need to follow that example too. When there's service that needs to be done, even if it's dirty, even if it's nasty, even if it's hard, even if it's something that in your mind you'd rather not do, but if there's a way that you can serve God in his kingdom, Jesus says, do it. I've set the example for you. If the Son of God isn't above washing feet, then you don't be above any job that the Son of God places in front of you in your life either. And blessed are you if you do them. There's greatness in serving. And there's blessings in serving. What are some of those blessings? I want to ask you a question. Have you ever known something that you could have done, that you should have done, but you didn't do, and you lay in bed at night thinking about that, and you don't sleep very well? I've been there. The person that you should have called, the person that you could have helped. I think sometimes about the priest and the Levite, and I wonder that night when they went to their nice, comfortable home and laid in their nice, comfortable bed, if they ever thought about, I wonder how that guy's doing that I saw that was half dead on the side of the road and I left him there. I hope they lost some sleep. Some people have no conscience. They won't lose a bit of sleep. But I hope that they lost some sleep. But you know, when I go through a day, and the opposite is true, where I feel like I've done everything that I could, I've given all of myself, I have served in every way that I knew to serve that day, I'll tell you, I sleep well those nights. There's a lot of joy in my heart, and there is peace in my heart when I know that I've served and I've done what I can. Those are the blessings of serving, joy and peace, love and respect. Tabitha, those widows, they're lifting up the things she made, and they say, look at what she did for us. And now she's gone. When you live a life of service, then you live a life where people naturally just love you because you have shown love to them, where people respect you because you have served them. Nobody respects a lazy person who avoids serving. They don't. I used to grow up mowing yards, and when I was mowing yards, the people you didn't want on your crew are the ones who didn't want to do anything. You don't want to work with those guys. Give me the guy who wants to work all day, who's got a lot of energy, who will do anything you ask him to. That's who you want to work with. You respect those types of workers. But people who always try to get out of work, always have an excuse, you don't want to work with people like that. When you serve, you're loved, you're respected. When we serve, we'll see growth individually, we will see development within the church. But finally, when you serve, there will be acceptance in the judgment. In the judgment. Not just here, but in the final judgment. And let me show you how simple serving can be. Sometimes we think we have to live in a fancy home and we have to have a lot of money to help somebody out. I think we overcomplicate serving sometimes. In Matthew chapter 25, you read about the sheep and the goats. I was just, last week, I was at a family's house from Ohio, and they have goats. And I understand after being around goats why Jesus put goats on the bad side. You have the sheep and you have the goats. And the sheep are the ones who are going to enter into the joys of the Lord, and the goats are the ones who are going to be rejected. But what were the reasons? Well, the reasons were, according to Jesus, the standard of acceptance or rejection was this: I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. They said, Jesus, when did we see you like that? And they said, if you do it to the least of these my brethren, you do it to me. What's the standard of judgment? Give somebody who's thirsty a cup of cold water. You don't have to be a millionaire to give somebody a bottled water, do you? Share somebody an extra serving of your food who's hungry. You don't have to make a fortune to do that. Most of us are overeating. I won't say most of you, but I know I'm overeating. Okay? And I've got extra to share at almost every meal I ever sit down at. You've got some hand-me-downs. We've been blessed in our life, my kid, because people have given us garbage bags full of hand-me-down after hand-me-down after hand. And those are things you can do for other people to help them out. Somebody's sick and they're lonely, especially in the past year. We've seen that all over the place. People are lonely. They are discouraged. It's been a very strange year. What can you do? Well, you can fill that void in some way for them. And Jesus says if you'll do this, if you'll just serve people and find small ways to serve in this way, then, he says, you will enter into everlasting life. It's a standard for judgment. So what kind of greatness do you seek? Do you seek greatness that is great by worldly standards? Is that what you're living for? The money, the fame, the education, the career? Is that what you're living for? Or are you living for greatness in the eyes of Jesus, which is just